Hi guys, so welcome back. This video is a snippet from a talk that Gabrielle Fundaro and I did discussing all things flourishing health, mindfulness, when it's okay to gain weight, dealing with stress eating, emotional eating, and all that good stuff. So hopefully you find this video helpful.
Let's talk then about feeling stressed when people are staying at home around COVID-19, all this quarantine sort of stuff. So why might people be feeling stressed right now, being around all of this food, and how can they kind of combat that and kind of overcome those sorts of feelings?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are obviously a number of reasons why people may be feeling stressed right now, some very legitimate reasons as well. And in all honesty, there's not a lot that some people can do to manage the frequency or the intensity of the stress that they're feeling, but they may have more control over the behaviors that they engage in to help deal with some of that stress. So when it comes to eating behaviors, I know a lot of people tend to reach for food in stressful moments because it does have those properties that do, temporarily alleviate negative emotions. But in the long term, that may not be an effective strategy for making yourself feel better if it is going to get in the way of reaching goals or just making you in the end feel bad about where this is going. So in those circumstances, something that can be really useful is using mindful eating as a way to try and reconnect with what it is that you're feeling and what it is that you really need in those moments. And I know that mindfulness kind of gets brushed aside a lot sometimes by the evidence-based community, probably just because of the terminology, whereas really what mindfulness is just it's a metacognitive skill of focused attention. And when you put it like that, it suddenly sounds a lot more interesting. And what it is really is just bringing awareness to the present moment with an attitude of openness and curiosity. So it's a reflective process. And if you're feeling stressed and you instinctively want to reach for food, one of the best things you can do is just to ask yourself, am I really hungry? And if the answer is no, then that leads on to further questions. And it's about asking yourself, what do I really need right now? Like if I'm stressed, is this food going to help? Sometimes you may still decide to go for the food. And sometimes you may think, actually, that's not going to make me feel any better right now. And what I really need is to chat to a friend because I'm stressed and I want to talk about, what's going on, get it off my chest. Like that may be a more suitable strategy for you. And the key part being that it is a reflective process. So even if you do end up having something to eat, hello, we're talking about mindfulness. And Gabrielle actually did a really good infographic on this. So do you want to talk about that, about meeting your needs with other snacks?
Yes, absolutely. So this was adapted from Michelle May's Am I Hungry program. So she has written a book and does coaching and client-based webinars and series on mindful eating and determining whether food might be the best way to meet your needs in that moment. And so part of the mindful eating cycle is first asking yourself, am I hungry? And if the answer to that is no, then you might find that another outlet would best meet your needs in that moment. If your need is not biological hunger, food is still an option, but it might not be the best way to meet your needs. And so one thing that I've come up with that I use with my clients is the idea of other types of snacks. So you might want a sleep snack or a company snack or a touch snack or a fun snack. So you might want to communicate with someone or, have some physical affection or go do something fun. And your need is better met by one of those things. If you are not hungry, your emotion might be that you're lonely or stressed or bored. And we are often sort of raised and conditioned to use food to meet those needs sort of temporarily. and may need to sort of relearn how we can better meet those needs through other means. So that's where I came up with the idea of other types of snacks. It started with just a sleep snack. It was kind of a joke, like, oh, well, if you're really, you're feeling tired, like maybe, it's time to take a nap, if you have 10 minutes instead of having a snack, if you find that, sleep would better meet your needs. And it was like a sleep snack is a nap, and then just grew from there.
So Shannon, before Gabrielle joined, we were talking a little bit about feeling stressed when you're staying around the home and things like that. I just wanted to build on this maybe with this question that's come in here about, is it normal to feel very hungry when feeling under the weather? Again, maybe a different sort of stressed feeling about being ill plus trying to maybe maintain diet. Is this a normal feeling for people to have?
I think it depends on what they mean by feeling under the weather, because if this is just an emotional feeling, then your energy demands haven't changed, so you shouldn't be physiologically hunger. And this is when we it feeds back into determining what it is that you need. But one thing that I think is really important to mention is around this time is that it's okay to want to eat more during these times. It's perfectly normal, especially if you're at home, especially if you're not feeling 100% because you're confused with everything that's going on. And I think something that can be really helpful is to take the pressure off and try not to overthink it so much. Take a step back. And again, it's about asking yourself what you need. If you're stressed, then you may not be physiologically hungry, but you may feel a drive to eat. So there is a difference. And I wouldn't worry too much about eating slightly more than normal, even if your energy expenditure, hasn't changed or has even gone down, because I think that's something that, you see a lot on social media is how to work out your new maintenance macros now you're at home and all the rest of it. And to be honest, if there was ever a time to chill out, is probably now, and to just give yourself a little bit more compassion. So that would honestly be my best advice, is to try and have a think about what it is that you really need. Remember that hunger is a physiological feeling, like you will feel like a growling in your stomach. You can refer to the hunger scale to help with this. Another question that we use to determine whether or not someone's actually hungry is asking yourself, would I eat vegetables right now? If the answer is no, then you're probably not hungry, and that's a sign that you need something else. And as we mentioned earlier, this can involve food, but it's a reflective process. So if you do decide to eat in this moment, how does that make you feel? Are you uncomfortably full? Have you, overshot it? And then keep that in mind for next time that you're faced with this emotion, and then use that previous experience to determine how you may act again. So under the weather, do you need more sleep? Do you need more food? There's a whole host of things. Do you just need to de-stress? Do you need to talk to someone? So to ask yourself all of these questions first.
Cool. Awesome. So we've got lots of questions coming in specifically about gut health, but I want to progress on to a couple of other questions and then maybe loop round to gut health, so we get a bit of a mix as we go. So Shannon, we obviously talked about stress, and this is a question that maybe I've not heard people talk about before, so breaking new ground for me here. So what's the harm in people making jokes about weight gain per se? How does that affect someone, and what's your thought process on that?
So I've seen a lot of memes, around what's going on, about all the weight that people are going to gain during this time of being in quarantine. And something to keep in mind is that a lot of people do struggle with different problems in terms of their eating behaviors. So you've now got people who have suffered with disordered eating or even eating disorders, who are now suddenly surrounded by a lot more, or spending a lot more time at home, with their kitchen, surrounded by food, in highly stressful times as well, which can exacerbate these tendencies and these behaviors. So I think sometimes joking about these things isn't really the most helpful way to, make people feel better. I know it can seem like harmless fun to some people, but also just keep in mind what other people could be going through as well, and whether or not you're really adding much to the situation by joking about this, especially on a public, social media. You don't know who's viewing this, and it could be making people feel worse. So I think there is definitely a lot of harm. And I think, Gabby, you may have something to add to that as well.
Yeah, if I could, one thing that I want to point out too is this really I think it's sort of a symptom of our stigma of weight gain.
Yeah.
And what the most sort of insidious effect here is that individuals who do desire to move away from chronic dieting are held back by the fear of weight gain because they're so afraid of the shame and the ridicule and the judgment that can come with weight gain, or even just the silence. So people they receive a lot of praise for weight loss. And then when they gain weight, either people say nothing or people sort of make offhand jokes about it. So we need to remove the stigma from weight gain and normalize that as part of the human experience. Because of course, if a person is chronically dieting and then they go through the exploratory phase, perhaps of intuitive eating, or they find some other way that they're liberating their eating, they may see an increase in weight. And as long as we can say, like, this is a normal part of the experience that we could expect happen, just like you may lose weight, but that's not the goal and it's not something to be avoided or moving toward, people will be more willing to be able to improve their mental health. But quite often they avoid, the improvements in mental health because they're so afraid of weight gain. So it's not like Shannon said, it's not a helpful message. It's not adding anything beneficial to the industry. It's literally just creating shame.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And you mentioned a little bit before about, I think some mindfulness type of things as we were going through some of the other conversations that we had earlier. So how does like mindfulness help in stressful times? Like particularly like a lot of people, I guess the amount of stress that someone's feeling is very different for different people, depending on the circumstances they're in right now. Some very highly stressed, some, this is not a huge shift for them. So how does mindfulness help in those stressful times?
Along with asking yourself, if we're talking in terms of mindful eating, like, are you hungry and what do you need? It's an unjudgmental experience. So it's to be done with an attitude of curiosity and openness. So that kind of feeds into what we're saying about feeling shameful for engaging in these behaviors. Like that wouldn't be characterized as being mindful in that instance, because it's about being open. And when you take a step back, it creates a space, and that space gives you choice. And if you have choice, then you're more likely to kind of figure out what it is that would be helpful for you. And I think people do themselves more harm often by the kind of things that are going on in their heads than what they're actually engaging in terms of eating behaviors. If someone feels guilty and shameful for having eaten something that they hadn't planned for just because they were stressed, like that's not a very helpful feeling. Whereas if you kind of can be open, you can understand why this is happening, and understanding is what's going to give you a space to, again, choose different behaviors if you wish, and I think that really is key. It's just that comes back to the self-compassion as well, like being open, assessing the situation and not being too hard on yourself for what does happen.
Yeah. With mindfulness, you can, what I like to borrow from is the idea, sort of the central tenets of the acceptance and commitment therapy approach, that you observe your thoughts and your feelings just sort of with curiosity. Like Shannon said, it's not judgment. You're just observing, okay, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? How is this affecting my behaviors? And then what can I do perhaps differently? Even if I have these difficult emotions, we can accept that difficult emotions will arise in a time like this, but what are the behaviors that I can do that move me closer to my values? And it's something that I use, even with, to bring it to gut health. When I'm working with folks who have had really negative experiences with food and food has caused them extreme GI distress, you can actually develop a lot of anxiety and fear just thinking about what might happen when I eat this meal. And so part of the process is just that sort of education and awareness and the mindfulness of, okay, I'm feeling anxiety about this. I know what could happen, and kind of removing the fear of the unknown. That really helps them progress and just reduce their anxiety around food as well.
And we've had an interesting question come in live related to mindfulness as well. So when working with a client, how do you, or is it something that should be not something that should be done, track or monitor their progress in the area of mindfulness? And could you share how you move a client through the phases of mindfulness?
I think the track and monitor is kind of a key use of language, because we can just ask questions. Like, we don't necessarily have to monitor things with numbers. We can just have conversations with our clients. So when I introduce the topic of mindfulness, it's usually because we've identified, behaviors that aren't mindful, and I present them with the mindful eating cycle, which again is from Michelle May, and that goes through a series of questions to ask yourself before you eat, whilst you're eating, and after you've eaten the meal as well. So that's something that you can take a person through, or you can go through yourself, is to physically sit there and write out, if it helps, the answers to these questions. And it's things like, how am I feeling? Am I hungry? How does this food make me feel? And all these sorts of questions. And that is practicing mindfulness before, during, and after you eat. So you can have a client go through that exercise. There's also other resources. I think Susan Albers is another one. She has a mindful eating checklist, which involves things like slowing down the pace of eating. And these are all questions that you can ask your client. So, how did you go? Last week we spoke about doing this. Did that happen for you this week? And how did it go? And let them just take the floor and just listen. That's a really effective way to monitor or track this, track mindfulness. It doesn't all have to be with like numbers or tick boxes. Just open dialogue is honestly one of the best ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So Gabrielle, you're gonna introduce me to some new terms here. So these are terms that I'm learning on this talk, let alone anybody else. So what is psychological flexibility and how can it help?
Yeah. So this is talking a little bit about, I guess in a nutshell would be sort of resiliency, the ability to adapt to challenges in your environment. And it really helps when folks are, and I think we get this in the fitness industry as well, that we become very goal oriented. Like, we have an objective that we have to meet. And right now it can be very frustrating if we feel like we have to put our goals on hold, or it feels like we might not meet them. We had a specific timeline that we wanted to reach them within, and now we have to put that on hold. And for some people, they have tied so much of their motivation to external factors to reaching these objectives, to having a specific aesthetic, that loss feels like a complete loss of motivation. And what we can sort of do instead is shift the source of motivation to, instead of being so goal oriented, to be value oriented. And part of the way that we do that, and this is something that I work on even when we're talking about mindfulness, is to have clients identify some of the values that are important to them. So a value isn't a goal or objective that you reach. A value is something that is important to you in terms of sort of like morals or character. So a value might be integrity or family or resiliency or helping, to help others. And what we can do then is identify those values and identify the behaviors that are aligned with those values that might not be moving toward a goal right now. We might not have to have an objective, but that we can move toward those values. And so the idea of psychological flexibility is related to acceptance and commitment therapy and the ACT matrix. And so the ACT matrix, the ACT matrix, is this 4-quadrant sort of graph that you can think of, and each one quadrant is your list of values, things that are important to you. And the quadrant above that are the behaviors that bring you closer to those values. Whereas on the left side of the chart, on the bottom, you have the difficult emotions and thoughts that might pull you away from your values, and then the behaviors that you engage in when you're experiencing those thoughts. And so the idea with psychological flexibility is that you show up, or you identify what you are doing in that moment, and then you can kind of release or let go of the negative emotions, not necessarily to say that you're going to ignore them or try to fix them, just that you're going to say, I don't necessarily have to let these prevent me from engaging in behaviors that are aligned with my values. So instead of, if you're feeling that you can't meet your goals right now, and so instead of going on walks to spend time with your family and promote your health, you might be sort of tuning out on social media. You can identify, oh, that's interesting. I'm sitting right now and I'm scrolling through social media. I'm sort of avoiding, perhaps my frustration with this goal. I can identify I'm frustrated that I can't meet that goal right now, but what else could I do instead? Well, if I'm living and aligned with aligned with my values, perhaps I could just get up and move in an enjoyable way because health is one of my values. Or I can put my phone down and turn to my family and say, let's play a board game or something, because family is one of my values.
Yeah, I think it's particularly relevant to what's going on right now, because as you mentioned, it's drawn from ACT and or ACT, and the kind of core teaching of ACT is that we should accept things that are out of our control, and still commit to action that improves our life. So that's kind of where the psychological flexibility comes in. And as you mentioned, it's about knowing your values. So, perhaps you were supposed to test for a squat max this weekend, and all of a sudden, you can't go to the gym anymore. But then take a step back, like, why were you even engaging in that behavior in the first place? Like, what does that really mean to you? And as you say, it could be because you value your health. Well, what other actions can you now do to follow through on those values, like going for a walk or, training in a way that you can train at home? Like, there's still a whole host of things that you can do. And that is the difference between having a goal and having a value. And I think that's really helpful to focus on those things right now when things are out of our control, but we can still do what it takes, because that's kind of the effective action part, accepting what is out of our hands and doing what it takes that is still within our control to live in alignment with these values that we hold.
Cool. See, I'm learning here. I'm learning good stuff. I feel like I'm going to learn something else now as well. What is flourishing health and why is that important? All these new terms I'm learning here.
Yeah, sure. So flourishing health is, the interesting thing is when you pay attention to all these different concepts, you see a similar idea being, spoken about in a different way. So Gabby and I are both doing a motivational interviewing course right now, and they recently mentioned flourishing, like how to get your clients to flourish. And I was like, that draws on from something else, which is a paper that I read by Vanderbilt. And this is where I first came across, or I have seen an actual definition of what flourishing health is. So to flourish is to grow and prosper across different domains of life. So flourishing health encompasses happiness and life satisfaction, physical and mental health, meaning and purpose, character and virtue, close social relationships, and then financial and material security as a means of securing the other 5 domains of health. And this is kind of, shouldn't really be, but it's almost revolutionary, because when we think of health, oftentimes we're just thinking of physical health. And we may even take a step to extrapolate that out further and seeing it as physical appearance to equate to physical health. And that's kind of where it all gets misconstrued. The reason that we're fully behind promoting the idea of flourishing health is that it does take into consideration your mental well-being as well, the meaning and purpose, the importance of having social relationships, all of these things that can get neglected and negatively impacted when we focus primarily on physical health. Like, it's just one tiny piece of the puzzle. And if we can improve that, brilliant, but not at the cost of other things. So that's something that's really important to us.
Yeah. And in terms of how that looks, let's say, for example, when you're working with a client, let's say, so are you encouraging them? Obviously, we'll do something around the nutrition, maybe something around the training. Are you then encouraging them to do other things like socially? Are you dipping into aspects of their life and encouraging them to do those sorts of things? Is that how it manifests in a client context?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that is sometimes a contentious issue is the idea of sort of rigid versus flexible restraint, and the idea of adherence. And people really promote the idea of being 100% compliant to a diet. I did my cut and I was 100% and didn't have any quote unquote cheat meals, and didn't go out, and even when I went out, I only ate out of my Tupperware container. And it was really challenging, and it was super invasive, and I'm proud that I did that. And in some cases perhaps that's necessary for a physique athlete, but for the majority of people it is so invasive that it is intrinsically unsustainable, and it reduces their quality of life during the cut diet. And then potentially they have a really difficult time reestablishing sort of sustainable habits during maintenance. And so they end up in these sort of, yo-yo dieting, weight dieting cycles. And Jake Lenardin, who, has talked a lot about intuitive eating and whatnot, I heard him on a podcast say, like, there's nothing good about rigid restraint. Like, there's nothing, he's not aware of any article, any research that says that rigid restraint is beneficial in any way. Maybe effective short term, but effective is not the same thing as beneficial, and when we're looking at long-term outcomes. So I absolutely encourage individuals to, whatever their weight management goal might be, if it does exist, that they pursue that in a way that is the most sustainable for them and the least invasive and most supportive of quality of life. So yes, that means you have snacks. It means that we help you, figure out what you're going to eat when you go to a restaurant so that you don't have to bring a Tupperware with you, that you can still meet your goals and have a life, and that they shouldn't be at odds. It shouldn't be that, you have, meeting goals increases as quality of life decreases. That's not how I think the pursuit of flourishing health should be. And one of the central tenets of motivational interviewing is that we believe that humans are innately driven to flourish. They want to grow, they want to develop. And even though at sometimes we may feel that we stagnate a little bit, we aren't usually feeling satisfied by that. We have this idea of like, oh, could I be doing more? Or like, I feel like I should have a greater purpose in my life, that humans innately want to change and they have the capacity to do so. And it may be just that they could benefit from working with a coach that helps to evoke that helps to pull that out. So that's really how it looks, kind of practically speaking.
Yeah, and I think the other important point is that it's a client-centered approach because, from that definition, you can see that health is very personal, meaning and purpose. That's individual. It's not for me or for any other coach to tell someone what should be important to them. It's about evoking those thoughts and feelings from the person that you're working with so you can collaborate on an approach that works for them. So often it would come up in something like, I didn't stick to my macros this weekend because I went out for a meal. And then that's, someone may see the situation and view that the client is being non-compliant and non-adherent. It's like, well, if that client understands the pros and cons to that, like they know what happens if they take themselves out of an energy deficit, they know that they're sacrificing potentially slower process if their goal is fat loss. But if they wanted to do that, who is to say that they were non-compliant? Because, maybe that's what was important to them. And if that keeps on happening over time, then the client can see that that's impeding their other goals. That is a realization for the client to make. It's not helpful for someone to say, non-compliant, try again next week. It's about determining what is the most important thing to the client, because sometimes maybe they don't know, they think they want to achieve this one thing, not sure what that involves and not sure what impact that will have on other things that are also important. So it's just about taking a more holistic approach and letting the client kind of determine what it is that's important, and you are acting as a guide rather than trying to dictate to them what should be going on.
And so these like ideas of flourishing health and so on and so forth might be quite new to people, and we obviously talked about it a little bit there in terms of how a coach would approach that sort of process. Maybe some people listening to this, watching this right now, are not in a position where they maybe can go down a coaching route, but how would you kind of maybe give them like a simple starting point, something to think about to really try and get on board with that way of thinking if they haven't got the ability or the facility to go down a coaching route right now?
Yeah, I think, I was going to say maybe the ACT matrix might be one of the first steps. That's usually what I do. And even before that, just listing values. That is actually incredibly challenging to kind of pick maybe 10 to 15 values, but starting with that, and then identifying some, using that ACT matrix to identify what are the thoughts and behaviors that are moving me away from my values versus those that are moving me toward my values. Just to kind of give a start to see what are some of the behaviors that a person might want to engage with. And then realize that ambivalence, that kind of wanting two things that are at odds. I want to go for a walk because I know it's good for me, and I also want to sit on the couch because it's relaxing. To do things like maybe a decisional balance worksheet where we look at the pros and cons of each one, and have conversations with maybe friends who don't try to give prescriptive advice, but will listen to you. Sometimes when we are discussing things, we can talk ourselves into or out of something, but trying to, determine what are the number of pros and cons in either direction. Are there more pros to me doing this one thing? That can kind of help you start to convince yourself in a way to move toward that behavior.
And do you find that there is any struggle between logic and emotion in that sort of process? So you've got an emotional feeling like you want to do something or you should do something, but then you've got you go through this almost like logical process to say, I should do this for all these reasons, but I just don't want to. Is that sort of a competing thing that people have to, not say fight against, maybe the wrong word, but try to, kind of understand the pull and push between logic and emotion?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really encourage is to move away from the shoulds, which creates a lot of sort of rules and restrictions and expectations and a little bit of anxiety and guilt if we don't do those things, to could. I could do this. I could do this other thing. And like Shannon mentioned, when we give ourselves that power of choice and that greater autonomy, that alone can actually increase the likelihood of engaging in behaviors.
Awesome. Okay, so for the people watching, we've got about 15 minutes left with Gabby and Shannon. So you're getting very much a lot of love in the comments. So this is
thank you.
Jonathan, preach, love preach. There you go. So if you've got more questions, you've got about 15 minutes to pile them in. How would you help people move away from tracking restrictive thinking around foods and seeing foods as just macros to more informed eating approach? How do you help them with their mindset around food?
So it's interesting that you use the term informed eating, because at Flex Success, we've written an entire book on moving away from tracking macros and teaching you how to take an informed eating approach. So that's called Life After Dieting. But essentially, to move away from tracking and restrictive thinking about foods, you can do it in a number of ways. There's no wrong or right, but it could be helpful to take it by, in a step-by-step approach. So if you're currently tracking everything, you can try by just moving a step back and tracking calories and protein, taking a step back from there and stop weighing all of your energy dense foods. So things like fruits and vegetables, eyeball those. And then you can take another step back, do some days on tracking, some days off, take another step back, do a week on, a week off. And that can be a very useful way to do that without kind of feeling like you just let off a leash. Because I know that some people, when they go from tracking to not tracking at all, they feel like they don't have any direction. The second thing to remember is that your food choices will not change just because you're no longer tracking them, right? You're the one who is deciding what to eat. MyFitnessPal or whatever device you're using doesn't dictate, the food choices that you're making. That's your decision and you're the one in control. So just because you're not monitoring anything doesn't mean that it will necessarily change. The second thing I think that really helps is actually to try and decrease the importance of that in your life. I think part of the reason that people are so scared to let go of tracking is because they're scared of what will happen. And this is where it comes back to, the stigma of weight gain. If you're willing to accept that perhaps my body composition may change, in most cases, nothing changes. But if you just accept, in worst case scenario, my body composition changes a little bit. Am I okay with that? Can I accept that? And if you can say yes to that, then that can give you kind of the freedom to let go of that fear, which will help you to move away from tracking your macros. I think a little bit of nutritional awareness helps too. Like if you're restrictive thinking about foods, asking yourself where that's coming from, understanding that there are no such thing as good or bad foods. It's about the context of your diet as a whole is really helpful. So don't think about, certain foods in isolation. Think about what you're eating over the course of the day, the weeks, the months, because that's the key thing. It's a diet pattern that's important, not specific foods. And I think, just to try and think about the function that food serves in your life. Like, yes, food is fuel, but it's far more than just that. Like, what else are your food choices offering you? Focusing on the satisfaction factor, actually enjoying your food a little bit, because that is part of what it does, like, are you eating? The interesting thing is that you can have two people eating the same meal for completely different reasons. Like, someone could choose, chicken, broccoli, and rice because it fits their macros and that's what they feel like they have to eat. But someone else could also choose choose chicken, broccoli and rice because it's like, oh, okay, I know that's, you know, a decent source of protein. It's going to nourish me. It's got a lot of nutrients in there. I'm going to feel good for this. And those are two completely different mindsets, even when eating the same food. Same thing can go with, you know, a bite of chocolate. Someone can feel guilty after eating that and someone can feel satisfied. Those are two completely different feelings, and it's all about the way that you're approaching it and viewing your food choices. Take a step back, do it one step at a time, but also work on the thoughts that that are going on in your head. Recognizing those thoughts and where they're coming from, I think, is a really key part of letting go.
Cool. Awesome. And just to build on that, I think we can maybe answer that question as well. So I don't think we've actually referenced it or mentioned it specifically on this talk. So maybe just talk a little bit about, for those that are not aware, what that is and then where they can find it.
Yeah, this this was kind of was going to be like a one little blog post that I thought I was going to write in the beginning because I was seeing people debate on intuitive eating without an understanding of intuitive eating. And it's something that like a lot of people do, you know, we think that, oh, intuitive eating is just like pink donut memes on Instagram, and there's so much more to it than that. And I thought, you know, there are so many times that we use sort of this idea of intuition, or we use interoceptive awareness and like the sense of what's going on internally to, you know, in training. And that's very widely accepted when we're talking about auto-regulation. And so I was talking to Shannon about it, and then we you know, as we do, came up with this huge idea, like, we were like, this has to be a multiple article thing. There are so many things to talk about. Other people aren't talking about this. So I was like, okay, we're going to do this together. Like, well, you know, we're going to put this information out there. So what was started with just like one little blog post, well, that came to be like a 10-page monster. And then we worked on a part 2 together. And then we worked on what was going to be part 3, which is probably now going to be part 3 and 4 and maybe part 5. But bridging the gap, the whole intention here is to improve dialogue in the industry and sort of just improve the quality and comprehensiveness of coaching for the betterment of client outcomes. So that we can, instead of being dogmatic and getting into our camps about macros versus intuitive eating versus whatever else you want to put in there, that we say all of these have applications. And if we want the best for our clients, we have to be cognizant of their applications. We also have to be cognizant of not just the external environment around our clients, but the internal environment within our clients. That's really how we can help them to evoke change over time. So as Shannon mentioned earlier, it's a very holistic look at how we can facilitate behavior change and how we as coaches can uphold, sort of ethical practice and move away from these, you know, the dogmatic approaches or just like strong opinions that aren't based in evidence, or at least be transparent about the things that we're willing to do or not. So our clients can sort of self-select for us, and you know, if their goals are aligned with our goals and values and ethics, that's fine. But yeah, just really to improve the dialogue, because there's a lot of sort of yelling at each other from across the divide, and it was sort of started as like the diet culture versus anti-diet culture, you know, for lack of a better term. So that's what we're seeing. We're trying to kind of bridge the gap, because there's no reason that there should be so much vitriol between, you know, people who are aligned with health at every size versus those that think they are not. And in many cases, we actually do have common ground. We actually are in agreement about many of the principles. It's just that we aren't in agreement with our idea of what we think those things are.
I think that's a really key point, that there is merit to each approach. Like that, you know, these haven't come from nowhere. Like the anti-diet approach is in response to things like weight stigma. That is very real and that is very valid. So it's about understanding, as you say, the common ground between all of the approaches, because for the most part, we are on the same page. We just don't realize it.
Yeah. Oh, and where you can find them is on, on our respective websites. So they're on a few different websites. So they're on vitaminphdnutrition.com. They're on renaissanceperiodization.com. They are on Eric Helm's the 3DMJ site. I believe they're on Revive Stronger, or are slated to be on, and then on Flex Success as well. And are there any other places you can think of? And then on Stronger Experts. So yeah, so they're kind of all over the place. And Shannon, her first author article ended up on Google Scholar.
Very, very good achievement there. Is a little bit of a plug for both of you. People have clearly enjoyed the last hour and 7 minutes so far. They want to learn more. They want to follow you, get more gut health and general well-being and life-changing information. Where do they go?
Shannon.
Okay, so I'm at Shannon Beer _ that's BEER, like the drink. So fairly easy to remember.
And I am Vitamin PhD.
Happy days. And what we'll do is after the day is finished, we've got a thread going with all of the speakers and the coaches and putting all of their Instagram handles in there. So we will add you into there so that people can just hit a button and follow you and get more great information. So thank you very much, ladies. Obviously, lots of information, super intellectual and insightful stuff, and clearly by the comments everyone's enjoyed it. So thank you for giving up your time, for joining us. Much appreciated. Have a great rest of the day in quarantine, whatever it is that you're up to. If you can enjoy yourselves, do so. But thanks so much, and sure we'll speak again soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for putting this all together.
No problem. Bye-bye.
Bye.